Hello, everybody. Today we're discussing executing on your vision. In today's episode, expect to learn what individuals, systems, behaviors, and cultures lead to effective long-term growth, what a healthy co-founder relationship and situation looks like, and why agreements are so important in the early stages for sustainable success. Thank you and enjoy. I think there's a lot of visionaries out there that struggle to execute on that vision and struggle to work on the day-to-day side of things.
Yeah.
Which is even more topical because that's just what we were talking about before this a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of like me spending way too much time on the long-term things and really working on implementing things. And there's a time to focus on the vision stuff, but then if you don't execute on it, then it's just
Vision without traction is hallucination.
But I think it's interesting, specifically coming from your perspective, since we don't really have an integrator,
Right.
or a COO or a second in command person.
Right.
So you know more than most, especially if we're talking within the coaching or EOS world,
Right.
what the challenges are of executing on vision.
Right.
So I guess to start, what would you say are the biggest challenges that you've faced in terms of not having an integrator?
Well, I have frameworks that help me understand things. And so, which have been sort of things that I've been using since before we ever started 90. So I think part of it is I understand the game we're playing and I understand the moment we're in better than, if I said the average founder, that would be an insufficient in terms of describing.
I'd undermine the point.
Yeah, because the vast majority of founders don't understand the moment they're in, right? Because no one's taught them how to understand where they are, the game that's in front of them, and that there are the unavoidable stages of development associated with that game, right?
And it's uncharted territory, right? You're in explore mode for a lot of that as a visionary.
Yeah. And yeah, you're in uncharted territory. You have no map. For most, they don't even really know what's important for them to really nail in the beginning versus, what's needs to be nailed, call it stage 3 or stage 4 or stage 5, and not worth, allocating any energy toward. And so there's a lot of frantic activity in the brain and within the organization, in, damn near every sort of startup. So I guess, to some extent, I was fortunate to be in a place where I understood the nature of the game before we ever started the company. And I understood it because I'd coached people. I understood it because I built businesses before. So, so going into it, I knew that, there's certain things that we need to worry about, and there's certain things that we're not going to worry about. And we've talked about this before. My classic example is really nailing process, in the way that it's taught by a lot of coaches and organizations that, try to help leaders master, the art and science of building a great company. So I think in the beginning, I knew, we needed to nail certain things on the vision front. We needed to nail the core value stuff. We needed to have a strong point of view on where we were going to be in 10 years and the guideposts or guiding principles that were associated with all that. And also I understood that I was going to be grinding. I was going to be doing some Stratum 1 work. I was going to be doing some, sort of day-to-day work, and I was going to be doing, some, work that typically is done by an early leader, and et cetera. So I wore lots and lots of hats, and I recognized that I was wearing lots and lots of hats, and I had a decent sense for which hats I needed to, give to someone else, and what the skills and experiences and sort of psychological DNA um, was required for that person to be comfortably wearing that hat. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, are there specific frameworks you use for that, or at least appreciate or like? Like,
Yeah.
Dan Martell has a bunch of them, for example.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the whole time span of capacity framework is super important. Um, I have always liked the Colby because I think it helps us not put square pegs into round holes around psychological DNA. Um, the whole notion that I talk about all the time is it takes thinkers, feelers, doers, and critics, and I leverage the Myers-Briggs, the type coach, sort of Jung model. And there are other things that I use. And obviously early on, we also just leaned into the classic 6 key components methodology that, Gino Wickman talks about in the book Traction. And so I think from the very beginning, I had a decent sense for what I needed to focus on, what I needed to own, what I could delegate. I knew what I liked doing and what I didn't like doing because I was, 8 years ago, I was in my 50s. So, I think generally speaking, even though I didn't want to be sitting as an integrator, I also knew that it wasn't forever. And I knew that because what we were trying to do has never been done before, um, you know, I knew that my time should be dedicated to getting things moving as opposed to trying to go out and find, an integrator, especially because I did not have a lot of confidence and I tried it once, right, in my ability to get someone who was going to come up to speed swiftly enough to really give me leverage as opposed to just be one more human that I needed to invest a lot of energy in, and where, um, especially if they sort of bought into the EOS framework on integrators, where they expected me to just give them, authority for running things on a day-to-day basis. There was no bloody way, right? I was going to give up authority on how things were being done on a day-to-day basis. So early on, right, I just, I got to own all this stuff, and it is what it is.
That's a little bit founder mode, but from the start,
Yeah.
where you're just really taking ownership over all that which is in your domain.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, you spoke about sort of the individual side of things, knowing your strengths and all that, and then
Yeah.
also knowing the system and what is the nature of the game.
Yeah.
Which of those do you think is more important or more foundational? Understanding yourself or understanding the nature of the specific game or arena that you're entering?
I think it's a great question, uh, and I can I can talk out of both sides of my mouth, right? So using the game metaphor, if you don't have a decent sense for the nature of the game, right, that you're going to be playing, right? If you don't understand that, let's just say soccer versus rugby, or, you know, that's a team sport. We could even go, if you don't understand the nature of the game, tennis versus rugby versus soccer versus football, et cetera, right? If you have no sense for the nature of the game you're about to enter into, right, you don't even know whether or not you have what it takes to play the game well.
But if you don't understand yourself and what your strengths are, how do you know that you're going to be able to succeed in any of those winning games?
Exactly, right? And so that's why I said I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this one, right? So I do think that, if I've seen way too many people in my, 40 plus years, think that they could be a successful founder when, within an hour of being with them, I'm like, no bloody way. So one could argue, and I would argue that, part of the reason I really want to do the 5 entrepreneurial archetypes is to help people decide whether or not they really have what it takes to play the game, right? That, and you're not going to know until you get out on the field. Right. Because it's one thing, like Mike Tyson says, right?
I was literally thinking about that quote.
Yeah. Right. Everybody has a strategy until they get punched in the mouth. Right.
Yeah, I was talking about that. I was thinking about that yesterday, literally, and my literal experience with that sort of thing. Where it's
Yeah.
like, how you're doing, like you can think about all these things, but you have to face the certain tests.
Yeah.
And it's like, be literally getting punched in the mouth.
Yeah.
It was like, I didn't know how I would react to that. And then that happened, and I reacted in a good way.
Yeah.
And that's good. But it's like, you don't know that until that thing happens.
Right.
I see that's interesting. You're literally having that conversation with somebody yesterday about that exact thing.
Yeah. And I mean, and to some extent, if you were really curious about that, you could obviously go take boxing lessons and experience what it's like to get punched in the face, right?
Yeah.
But most people don't.
No, and that doesn't have to be literal, right? Doesn't advocating that everyone goes and gets their teeth knocked out. That's not the message here.
No.
But I think there's a part of it where you need to pick your sacrifice.
Yeah.
And you need to face that challenge voluntarily. If you want to figure that out, it's like you go enter that arena, and worst case, you're going to learn a lot about yourself.
But it's even more complicated than that, right? Because a lot of times you have, my experience was because I did angel investing and I also coached a lot of people, for decades. And I'd have these people sitting in front of me, and it's like, is your spouse going to support this? Are you ready for this? Right? Are you financially ready for this? Are you emotionally ready for this? Are your relationships ready for this? Right? Because it is hard. Right. And it costs money. Right. And when I say it costs money, I mean, you could either be making money, right, on the one hand, because you got a regular job, or you could be getting no income. And worse, you're taking money out of the bank, right, to fund this thing because can't do this by yourself. Right. Back to thinkers, feelers, doers, and critics. You need to figure out whether or not you can get through each of these gates. Right. And whether you have what it takes, not just resiliency, but anti-fragility. Right. Do you have the mindset that's, we're exactly where we're supposed to be, learning the lessons we need to learn?
Do you respond positively to stress or negatively to that kind of stress?
Right.
Are there smaller arenas or ways to see whether or not you would be successful or would be able to handle or even
right,
becoming a founder?
Well, one of the things I wrote about in Founders Mode series is, sort of intrapreneurs, right? People who have sort of played the entrepreneurial role within a company. People who have, started a division or pushed the company to do something, and led some effort. And so that you can do that, right? You can lead, you can take something that's just an idea and turn it into reality. I mean, it's even as simple as, I think most people would be wise to come out of school, whether it's undergrad or even high school, right, and get a job and understand the nature of work, right, and the disciplines associated with showing up and learning and working with diverse groups of people, all sorts of personalities and quirks and aspirations and ambitions and all that good stuff, right? And then take on more responsibility. Take on responsibility that, it's not part of your job. Go and grab, additional responsibilities. Put yourself out there and take on rocks, or say, I want to take on these challenges, which are not associated with the work I'm doing. I see this opportunity to help you with this or help you with that or help you with something else. And so I think there are ways for you to sort of test that early on and test it and push it, right? And rocks are a good example. In most companies, they're, hopefully they're doing 90-day cycles and there's opportunities for you to say, hey, can I help with something? And then, just push for leadership, push for responsibility, push for taking on risk, push for taking on challenges that ultimately you're going to have if you step into an entrepreneurial activity, other than if you're just going to be a solopreneur and, go write your own, a blog as an example. That even then though, right, you're taking on risk. You're taking on, the stress associated with getting rid of your income. And of course, there are other things you can do, which is sort of burn the midnight oil and have a day job, and then start working on an idea where you're basically, putting your toe into the arena, but you're sort of, you're playing entrepreneur at night. And do you have the ability to do that? Can you burn, sort of a little bit of the proverbial candle? Can you do the 14 hours, the 15 to 16 hours? Will your family, will your circumstances allow for it to happen? You'll learn a lot doing those things.
So we talk about the entrepreneurial archetypes.
Yeah.
So I think you said there's basically like 3 things. One is entrepreneur,
Right.
solopreneur,
Right.
and then midnight oil.
Yep.
So which of the archetypes would be best suited to each?
Well, the accident, right, we're going to say accidental. We're going to push that aside because that's on accident. This we're talking about
Because all of these things are intentional.
Yeah, these are intentional. So accidental goes out the window, right? Now, the opportunists, right? You can be opportunistic within your company. You can be opportunistic at night. You can be opportunistic as a solo, right? So you can be an opportunistic entrepreneur there. As far as lifestyle goes, it's an interesting conversation because we're talking about specifically the midnight oil is not necessarily going to be a lifestyle unless you've said, hey, I'm going to trade lifestyle for a while.
You're sacrificing present for the future.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of lifestyle, I think the least likely for lifestyle would be entrepreneur. That just doesn't,
Right.
don't see that a lot.
No.
But you see a lot of the solopreneur thing. And you also see a lot of the midnight oil thing because it's like, they're like, oh, I want to do this. And then they start doing that. And then usually it's just creating passive income.
Right.
With the sole purpose of quitting the day job.
Yeah.
Right. That seems really popular right now.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
You're sacrificing lifestyle for lifestyle.
Yeah.
But
that's a good thing, actually.
it is a good thing.
Right? Because you're willing to do the hard work in order to get what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that? I forget who said it, but finding your labor of love is preceded by finding a love for labor. And so in doing that, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I actually enjoy doing this. And
Right.
it kind of evens out any imbalance there or any, right? If you want to just like, oh, I don't want to work. I just want to do this thing, but I can really hang by my fingernails for 6 months.
Right.
Right. And that will turn into a year. And you're like, oh, and then you end up unlocking the door that allows you to do something that you would love, which isn't just passive income kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which I always think is interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is, I have a theory, and once again, we talk about research, right? I have a theory that a lot of lifestyle entrepreneurs are capable of being legacy and visionary entrepreneurs. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you just are one forever, but you go in sort of with the lifestyle approach, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, right? And then you become more invested and you're like, no, I don't want to just have my own little team and my own 9 to 5. There's a real opportunity here. And all of a sudden you become invested in this grander, longer vision, and you start to find yourself moving away from being a lifestyle entrepreneur to being, either a legacy or a visionary entrepreneur.
So bringing it back in, I feel like most of these things are you figuring out, you developing your character in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then while also in a more observational way, learning the nature of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the more crucial thing is developing your character, because I feel like it's harder to do, is make yourself into the person that will succeed across games.
Yeah.
Right. And there's the hierarchy thing, like the person at the top of any given hierarchy can succeed across hierarchies.
Right.
Right. I think that's underappreciated as a principle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit chicken and the egg thing, which I have it's not even an opinion. It's just the egg came before the chicken.
Right.
But I always think that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because usually it's like one or the other. You can't say, oh, it's like one or both. It's like if you dig down deep enough,
Yeah.
it's like one of the things is more foundational.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to stop growing as a person if you're pushing yourself.
Right.
So when you develop yourself as an individual and then you enter that game, you learn to understand the nature of it in that arena, you're still going to be learning a lot about yourself in that process.
Yeah. And, it's like one of these things which we've never shared with, I don't know if you've talked about it. Have we talked about the matrices of competencies? I don't think we have. Yeah. So it's one of those things where, and we'll someday, I'll put that out into the world. But, as you're moving, through the stages, and you're moving from sort of, product market fit where you're wearing all sorts of hats, right? And you're just super narrow and super focused on getting product market fit, and you control it all. And then you're getting some good signals, like I've said before, whether it's revenue or someone's willing to invest in what you're doing because they can see the longer game. And then you start to take off hats and you start hiring people and giving them the hats that make sense for Stratum 1s. And you're now predominantly wearing Stratum 2 hat in terms of how you spend your time, and then Stratum 3 and Stratum 4 and then Stratum 5, et cetera, right? What you're going to do is you're going to be developing, not just, skills and experiences in terms of one thing, but there's a whole host of competencies. There's leadership competencies, there's ego, right, competencies, there's time span of capacity competencies, there's delegating and letting go there's all these competencies. There's becoming more confident in terms of your ability to solve more complex problems. There's all these competencies that you start to amass. Speaking of hierarchies of competencies, and sort of rising and having competencies across 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different dimensions, right? And so, back to the beginning conversation around integrator versus visionary, you are basically playing mostly integrator and mostly manager, and doer, right? In those earlier stages, you're wearing tons of hats, and it just is what it is, right? Unless somehow or another you have co-founders, that makes it easier. It really does. But then what percentage of the co-founders work out? That's a whole nother thing to do some good research on. My sense is that, a lot of good potential businesses and good potential founders, get stuck and implode because of co-founder issues, right?
Would you say that's a issue of prioritizing the relationship over the success, or taking action on the purpose?
Well, it's my bias here, and we don't have the research to support this particular bias, right? But I believe, back to agreements versus relationships, right? I believe that I look back on some of the efforts that I worked on with co-founders. There was no agreement, right, on who's doing what, and you've experienced that.
When I was just talking to somebody who is a co-founder, and they're struggling with this, and like, so what are the things? And he's like, oh, we have good lawyers. I'm like, you're not understanding the question at all here. He's like, well, why? And it's like, well, okay, we really got to step it back here, look at the big picture, understand why the agreements are so important.
Yeah.
And even if you're trying to exit in 2 years, it's like, well,
2 years is a long time.
that's a long time.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be longer than that.
Yeah.
And do you want that to be an effective 2 years, both for the company and everyone involved and yourself, as you learn all of these things? 'Cause you're young. Yeah. Figuring all these things out.
Yeah.
And if you can do this now, you're going to have such a huge advantage at the next thing you do.
Yeah.
Regardless of what that is.
Yeah. And, without these agreements, and very explicit, right? Very explicit agreements. And, I have one guy who I worked with years ago, and he just refused to have explicit agreements. And it's like, he's like, we don't need that. I'm like, 100% we do, right? And it's like, okay, who's going to do who owns which hats? and how many hours and how much money, right? And how do we make decisions? There's all these things that need to be talked about and agreed to. And when it's not, right, my experience has been you have, especially certain personality types, right? They don't want to do that. I think it's a combination. It's my agreements-based mentality versus one of the people I can think of, both the people I can think of, actually a number of people I can think of, my own experiences. And then if I think about some of the other groups that I've helped over the years, there were a lot of relationship-based versus agreements-based tensions within those groups of humans.
I think it's element of that is avoiding accountability.
Cake and eat it too.
Option preservation.
Discomfort.
Yeah.
With having hard conversations.
Especially if you've known someone for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, now we got to act like a little bit strangers here.
Or it's even if it's a new relationship and you really want that relationship to work, and so you're not going to stress test it.
Yeah, if it's either really new or really old, that conversation is kind of weird.
Yeah.
There's a sweet spot where it's not uncomfortable to have that conversation. But it's like if I mean, any of my friends from high school, like that'd be a really awkward conversation to have with them.
Yeah.
And then if you just go up to somebody and you're like, hey, this is what I want and this is what we should agree to. It's like, whoa, you're moving too fast here.
Yeah.
Right. You got to sort out the dynamic first.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there probably is like a framework around that I just don't know about.
Well, I mean, there's slicing pie is a framework around allocating the equity, as an example.
Right? I mean, those sorts of, but in terms of
what's interesting about
the social side of the frame, like a social framework around that.
But what's interesting about the social side of slicing pie, as an example, right? It's like, because the Venn diagram overlap here is really interesting, right? So I see people where, they don't agree on, okay, so you're going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to put in, 80 hours a week and you're going to put in 80 hours a week. And by the way, right now I make, I'm just going to make this up. I make $600 an hour and you make $200 an hour, right? So if I put in 80 and you put in 80 and I'm putting it at my market rate and you put it at your market rate, no, well, wait a second. I thought we were equals, right? And so it gets weird really fast, right? Because a lot of people, especially the people that really don't want to work 80 and they look at this as an opportunity for them to step up. And like there's, in part of it, a lot, what I've seen a number of times is the person who has less experience and frankly wants to work a little bit less hard, right? They're playing an arbitrage game and they don't even know it.
Do you think there's an ego development option to that?
100%. 100%, right? And so what it ends up happening is the slicing the pie really forces the real conversations to take place really early on, right? And status comes into play, all this stuff comes into play. And and I think if two people come in and they're relatively equal in terms of competency, their market value, how much they're going to work, how much trust they have in each other from a competency, character, and perspective and connections perspective, how aligned they are up here, right? Yeah, then you got a really powerful, co-founder set. But I'll bet you the vast majority of co-founders do not have that going on. And there's an arbitrage thing that the more junior co-founders are looking for and think this is awesome, right? They don't even probably even know how to articulate, and they don't even probably see it in their own heads. And then you get into the whole thing about like back to visionary versus integrator, right? If the co-founders are, I've seen this, two co-founders who think they're visionaries, right?
There's a lot of that.
Yeah. I have not.
You look at a lot of co-founders that are integrators.
I have not seen it work, period.
No.
Period.
Oh, it doesn't work in businesses. It doesn't work in bands. It doesn't work anywhere.
Yeah.
Because you can't have two visions.
Yeah. And there's a whole, duality and yin yang thing that needs to work out. And, years ago I wrote a guide called Dynamic Duos. And, It was on my old site, and it needs to be converted and updated. I've looked at it recently, but I get into a lot of this stuff because the co-founder thing it's especially if you're. I think it'd be interesting to see how many co-founders are extroverts versus introverts, successful co-founders versus an I and an E as an example.
Oh, okay. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like you typically have, if it's a founder or if it's a visionary integrator pair, visionary would lean more E, integrator would lean more I.
Right. And I'm an
On
I,
average.
right? And so
You're a middle I.
yeah,
You're like if we're doing it 1 to 10,
right.
I to E, so you're a 4,
Yeah,
probably,
right.
which is why you work at a software company. You just wanted to get out of coaching. You're like, I don't want to deal with people. Well, I'm joking.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you do enjoy it, but you're not as
I don't
I as some people.
right, and I'm not, and I don't need people all day long.
No, yeah, which is funny to see you get into that mood. But
Uh-huh.
I enjoy being around people. I need probably an hour every day, and
Yeah,
I'm happy.
and I need 4 to 5 hours every day of me time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So with the co-founder thing,
yeah,
I think we've covered what makes a better co-founder set in terms of likelihood of success.
right.
So if you have a good co-founder set,
Yeah.
do you think the vision to execution issue is in a good place or a good starting point?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. I think if you're fortunate enough to be able to really align early on, have a dynamic duo really early on that meets all the criteria for success. Yeah, I think that's very powerful. But I don't. I think it's harder. I think it's rarer than people think it is for that pair to come together. And I think you can have, as an example, going back to my career, you can have these dynamic duos or even trios, right, who come out of a company and start their own business.
But they've
In
had
the
a lot of
same
experience
Yeah.
working together. They know how it works.
Yeah, and they're all aligned, and they have frameworks that they've all agreed to, right? And it's, and those are very, I think the probabilities of those things succeeding are pretty damn good.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to co-found something with someone I haven't worked with. That would be. I wouldn't feel confident.
Yeah.
So then right on the flip side, if it's not a healthy pairing,
And by the way, that's a legacy, most likely a legacy group of entrepreneurs, right? Because they're sitting in a company, they see an opportunity to do something stronger within their industry, and so that's a classic group of legacy entrepreneurs.
so I guess if you're taking it outside of that industry,
Right. Then
what does that look like?
Then someone's got a vision for taking this and applying it to it in creating an entirely
different industry.
Yeah, entirely new industry
for that.
Yeah.
Opportunity or just a need for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe because they're sitting in a company and that company is using a product, right? And they're like, this product sucks.
Yeah.
Right. And we've interviewed, a bunch of different people to see if we can get a vendor to give us this product, and no one's done it. Right. But there's just no one who's got a decent product. That's an opportunity for us. Right. And that could be now you're talking about a sort of a visionary collection of entrepreneurs.
So now moving outside of the co-founder set.
Yeah.
Let's say you're a visionary founder. What are the, I guess, building blocks or ingredients of, let's say, stage one, stage two, of creating a solid and effective system for executing on the vision?
Well, I mean, product market fit, you don't need a system.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm going to assume you should have a little checkbox here. Like, we have product market fit.
Yeah.
We got
Product market fit now. And so now you got product market fit. So hopefully at this point in time, you're really starting to lean into, okay, so this is my ICP. This is our unique value proposition, right? And now we're going to go start hiring people. So let's make darn sure that we hire the kind of people that we generally want to be around from a cultural perspective, core values perspective, right? So you're getting into a relatively decent relatively well-defined set of forever agreements, right? Your core values, your ICP, your compelling value proposition, and core values, ICP, compelling value proposition, and why I'm having and compelling why, right? What you all think you're doing in order to make the world a better place. So we've got that stuff going on, right? And now we're talking about just a visionary, or now I'm starting to go out and hire people.
You go out to hire people.
Right. So I'm
building out the system,
at
the
stage
structure.
2, right? Yeah. I'm at stage 2 now. So I've got my forever agreements in place. And now hopefully, right, systems wise, one of the systems you need to start working on sooner rather than later is hiring. How to hire and onboard people. And you need to start working on structure. So that's a really important component of the system, right? You need to understand, which particular areas of expertise are really important. Is it, do you need salespeople? Do you need a marketing organization, right? Do you need a product organization? Which hats are you comfortable wearing through stage 2? Which hats are you comfortable wearing through stage 3, et cetera, right? So yeah, the system, I believe you should start working on implementing the system, but understand what's important at that stage of development in terms of the system, right? So I teach this, right? The unavoidable stages of development. These are the stages. These are the parts of the 9 core competencies that you need to hit earlier. These are the parts that you can work on a little bit later. It's like, once you start to find yourself moving away more and more from understanding everything that's going on in the organization, data becomes more and more important. So you can see what's working and what's not working. Because early on, the data is it's flowing through your brain everywhere, right? You're involved in everything. You see what's working. It's all not just intuitive. It's intuitive and it's real, right?
I mean, you have the purview over the thing.
Everything. You see everything, right?
And the only way to do that at scale is data.
Yeah. That's the only way to do it at scale is data. And so structure first, people second. So you need to start working on the structure stuff, right? You need to start working on the KPIs stuff. You need to not worry about, the KPIs in terms of the things that you're closest to, but where you starting to move further and further away, where you're giving up the hats, right? That's where you like, okay, so I'm giving up these hats. I want to make sure that they have the skills and the experiences. I want to make sure we're on the same page in terms of the KPIs and the targets, right? And so you as you move through the stages, you need to decide from a systems perspective, what are the systems in place that enable you to let go and wear less hats, and hopefully the hats that you continue to wear are the hats where you're, pretty uniquely qualified and you enjoy doing it. Because after a while, right, if you're wearing a bunch of hats that you hate, you're going to burn out. You're going to grind away, right? So the system helps you sort of figure that out and see that and delegate and elevate and stay in touch with that you need to at least have a decent sense for in terms of how it's performing, even though you're no longer involved.
From a structure perspective, and I guess hiring, do you think that there are we've talked about Colby and Myers-Briggs and all that. Do you think there are certain trait frameworks that are more important at the earlier stages versus the latter stages? Because I think as we grow, we're finding that like your Colby and your Myers-Briggs, or we use type coach, isn't fully sufficient,
right,
at making sure that all these things work. And we're exploring other things. And and so going back to it is like, do you think that the ego development test is a crucial thing in a stage 2, as crucial as it is at stage 5 and beyond?
Not at stage 2, because for the most part, right, all the people you're hiring are entry level or right, stratum 1, sitting in stratum 1 seats. And so, but and but you do want to, Colby, I think you can start using day one, right? So certain seats, you need fact finders, you need high follow through. Other seats, let's just say it's in sales, right? You need someone who's comfortable with, well, it depends on the product, right? But someone who's comfortable with rejection, and maybe it's important that they're good at follow through because they're involved in, completely bringing the customer on. Maybe it's important that they're really high in fact finding because they need to go out and find clients that meet a certain type of, sort of um, uh, criteria. All right. And so so it all depends. But, it's interesting if we look back through our journey now, and we're going on 8 years, um, one of the characteristics that I believe I didn't do as good a job of understanding as I would have liked to have, as I'd advise others, is if you're in truly a startup company and you're going to be under hyper growth for years and years and years, right? We can define hyper growth as 20, 30, 40% or more, right? Um, you're going to go through all these stages of development. Leadership's going to change. Structure is going to change. Change is like it's there, period, into discussion. So if you go and hire a bunch of people who just want stability, like that's a really important thing for them, right? It's going to be hard. They because they come in at one stage and they like what that stage feels like. And then all of a sudden you're at another stage and you restructure things and you change things. They're like, whoa, 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 right? This is not what I was doing a year ago. Right. So we've seen that. I think we've seen people who really loved getting hired into stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4, and they wanted to just kind of stay there. Well, no, it can't. Right. So, I do think that there are other tools besides Colby and Type Coach. Predictive index and cultural index help you identify, whether or not someone's really, stability is really super important to someone. So, there are a bunch of different tools out there. You have lots of tools that I think have really interesting value, but you can't be running around with 7, 8, 9, 10 tools. So this is a whole other thing that we've got to, I'd like to work on.
It'd be cool if there was a thing that could do a lot of that and make it simple.
And make it simple. Yeah.
As the visionary, what behaviors, right? That can be accountability, all those things, but on the part of the visionary, lend to good execution on those ideas.
What behaviors?
What behaviors? Accountability, openness, honesty, conviction.
Well, is conviction a behavior, right?
Acting, being assertive is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And to some extent, you could say disagreeability is associated with all this.
I would say conviction stems from disagreeability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably low neuroticism.
Right.
And then that creates assertiveness.
Yeah.
Or conviction, which leads to assertive behaviors.
Yeah.
If we really break it down here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even if you're not super or highly indexed on those traits, still being assertive, right? It's like, we're going with this. We don't, in certain situations, we don't need to, this isn't a decision by committee kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
For example, if we're keeping focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is something that we probably should write about, right? Under the Founders Mode series, not the series per se, right? But we're going to transition from the series part 13 series to continuing sort of articles on that related to Founder Mode. But if you're the founder and everybody else, everybody in our company has equity, but there's one thing to have a little bit of equity and there's another thing to have a lot of equity, right? And so the probability of me going away, right, is really, really super low. right? But, you know, as we've experienced from the very beginning of the company, a lot of the senior people have left, right? So, you know, if you're, if you're giving up control and you're giving up your vision in order to placate a member of your team who may or may not be there in a year or 2 years, right? Is that really a wise thing to do, right? And so this ends up to you put on your point on assertiveness and conviction. I was like, this is where we're going. I deeply believe this. I'm going to be here in 2 years. I'm going to be here in 5 years. I'm going to be here in, in 7 years, right? And so, and my I'm grinding on it. This is all my time. This is my money, right? I've got tons of conviction on this whole thing, right? So yeah, I think that and you could have two founders who, early on, appear to be working really, really well. And I've seen this a bunch of times. Whereas, one founder's like, well, I just want to work 40 hours a week. And another founder's like, I'm working 80 hours a week. And one founder's like, if we're going to grow, we can't grow more than 10%, right? Because otherwise I'm going to get tapped out and I'm going to get stressed out because I can't continue to do my 40 hours a week if we're growing this thing at 60 hours or growing this thing at 40%, right? And so you see a lot of times where founders have very different levels of ambition, and there's a lot of conflict in there, and it's not even talked about, right?
And it's an honesty and openness that leads to consistency, right? Because you're trying to placate people, they're not going to be consistent. That erodes trust.
Average players want to be left alone. Good players want to coach. Great players want to know the truth. They want to talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah, but if you put up a facade trying to placate, appease, not offend,
Right.
all of those things,
Sooner or later, you're going to blow.
You're gonna blow, or some other side of you is you're gonna snap, or you're gonna reveal what's underneath, and it's like, whoa, what's going on there?
Right.
And also, I think we've run into this as I'll say an issue,
Okay.
where it's like, oh, everything's shifting around, right? Like what we're doing is it's moving around a lot, and it's like, well, no, it's like the core thing is always
Right.
remain pretty much the same.
Yeah.
It's only gotten clearer over time, but it hasn't changed. But then if we look at it like an iceberg, the bottom of it's pretty steady, but the top is shifting with the winds and the weather and all that.
Right.
And so if you don't want to dig deeply into it on the surface, like, wow, it's really different. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that a year from now are like, well, 90s really changed. And it's like, no, we're just doing a better job of what we did before.
Yeah. Well, but because we're going through that, right? This is, we've talked about this before, right? Leadership changes on the ones and threes, and we're now doing the $30 million to $100 million march, and structure's changing, right? The ICP is not changing. The compelling why is not changing. Our core values are not changing, right? Our compelling value proposition isn't changing. We're getting better and better at articulating it. But to your point, the core is not changed. Structure absolutely changes, right? And then not only that, but I keep taking off hats and giving them to people, right? But I'm still wearing, too many hats. And as you give up the hats and you bring someone else in, they're going to have their way of doing things that's going to be different than my way of doing things. But as long as it's aligned with our vision and it's aligned with all of our core, our forever agreements, and it's all aligned with, the other core agreements and guiding principles that we have, right? We all solve problems and take on challenges in different ways because we're all extraordinarily unique. And so, that's what gets back to, if you think you're going to be in a hyper growth company and there's not going to consistently be change, then, and one could argue that I haven't done as good enough a job explaining this to the company, but I would submit to you that I did explain this darn well to every single person who I interviewed, right? Now I don't interview everybody anymore. Right. And that started a year. Right. And, at a certain salary, I get involved in the interviewing process. But, below that, I have not been involved in those interviews for, at least a year now, maybe 2 years. Right. And so you got that dynamic as well. It's like, well, I and we have about 90, and I think maybe we could do a better job of explaining that,
Oh, we're gonna put our whole guide on that out in short and long form.
yeah,
I think that will help.
yeah,
But also, I think we're learning. Right?
yeah,
This is all development, and you gotta
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah,
I think a lot of people do appreciate the change and the growth, and they see that as opportunity, not threat.
yeah,
Um, but we need to we're learning all the heuristics associated with making sure that people do have the right mentality, right perspective going into the thing.
and that as leaders, we do a good job of helping them understand the game they're, playing.
Yeah, and as far as communicating it really well to the leaders, and then making sure that they understand it at a deep enough level to be able to communicate it to their
Yeah.
teams.
And
And we haven't done as great of a job as we should historically there.
yeah,
But I feel like it's one of those things where it's like I believe that will be mostly resolved in the next couple quarters.
yeah. And I think, obviously there's a part of you that part of me that feels a little defensive on this because we talk about, our core values and why they're important every single quarter, every single state of the company. We talk about how we're performing, right? We talk about what's working, what's not working. We talk about where we're going. We talk about our levels of ambition, right? So as the visionary leader of the company, I feel like I've done this reasonably well. I feel like there are certain parts of the organization that we could have done it, right? The next level down could have maybe done a better job of explaining things, right? Or asking questions or, answering questions. And so, some of that's why you have some turnover in your leadership, right? Is because of that dynamic. But there's no question. I feel like I need to make it is clear. I feel like I need to be the one who takes responsibility for it in a deeper, more organizational and holistic manner, perhaps than I thought I needed to. And that may be a cop out on my part, but obviously I do feel like I have to own this.
And I think, to give you credit, the way that you want to do it is different than everyone else does it, because you want it to be fully explicit, coherent, and
Yeah.
resonant.
Yeah.
And I think that has proved to be it sounds great,
Yeah.
but to have that level of explicit understanding is very difficult.
Yeah.
But it also forces you to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles in there aren't any gaps in the system.
Yeah.
And so I think we're really close to nailing that,
Yeah.
or getting to a point where that actually works.
Yeah.
But I think you've done explicit, but not resonant. I think that's probably where we've been least. That's been our weakness in terms
Right.
of those three, is being, explicit. Well, I don't
Yeah.
know. It'll be more explicit once it is resonant, coherent, but
Right.
it's an interesting thing. It'll be cool probably in 6 months' time
Yeah.
to revisit the explicit, coherent, resonant thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once we actually see how that plays out.
Right.
To wrap up,
Yeah.
I'll give you 90 seconds. I'm fucking screwed. I'm gonna bring out the timer. So we do 90 seconds, 3 questions.
Okay.
All right. I'll start after I ask the question. I feel like that's fair. Regarding learning how to execute on vision,
Right.
how much of that is learning from experience and sorting out those things, seeing what's going on, addressing those things, and building out that, expanding that area of competency? How much that's learning from experience versus just applying knowledge, basically?
In terms of the vision itself, I think you have to be honest with yourself and everybody in the organization with where you're like, I'm really confident about this. And these are the areas where I think, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 10, this is a 9, this is a 6, this is a 7, right? Where you're being honest with everybody around you in terms of how locked in the vision is and what the implications are and how to use the vision to help guide day-to-day decisions. And then the other thing I would say is really helping people understand where you are stage of development wise, so they can appreciate why you're involved in the things that you're involved in, and they can appreciate you're going to be giving up the hats as the company evolves. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. I saw you looking at the timer a lot there. It's good. Keep you nervous. All right. Why is an agreements-based culture so crucial?
Because agreements are everywhere, right? I mean, and agreements-based cultures scale, relationship-based cultures don't scale particularly well. And you need to just figure out which, agreements are your core values. Agreements are your, your unique value proposition, your compelling why. All of your forever agreements are forever agreements are agreements. And then structures and agreements, hats are agreements, KPIs are agreements. Rocks are agreements, to-dos are agreements. The only way an organization can scale is having the things that really matter be agreements.
I think we should have forever agreements are agreements as a quote in the next newsletter.
But that could be a social media post, not just that. That name was stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just freeze that, put that on there. It's gonna be your new headshot for everything. All right. Finally, if your plan, no co-founder,
Right.
and your plan is to hire an integrator,
Right.
or a COO, second in command,
Yes.
day-to-day person,
Yeah.
at what stage or when should you hire that person?
Well, it would be awesome if that was a co-founder.
That's why I specified no co-founder here. Kind of ruins the question a little bit.
That would be awesome. We should do research on this. My instincts are it depends on how fast you're growing, right? That's a big thing, right? Because if I would have, when people were starting to say, Mark, we want you to get an integrator, right? I knew within 1 to 2 years, I was highly confident within 1 to 2 years, I would be filling out the C-suite. And all of a sudden, then the integrator, right? If that integrator came in at a Stratum 4 level and I hired Stratum 4 C-suite people, then what's the integrator do? Right? Do we get rid of the integrator? Do you go hire an integrator saying, oh, hey, and by the way, within 2 years, you're going to lose your job, right? So, I mean, I really think it depends on, on the nature of your business, on the nature of your growth. If you're slower growing organization and you've got everything in decent shape, you just want to let go of stuff like the day-to-day, right? And you want someone just to make sure that the trains are running on time. I think integrators are great, but I think you want to get things reasonably well set up, so that when that happens, you are like, this is who we are. This is how we do things. This is the structure, right? When they come on in, you need to be on the same page with regard to them and you and how you divide and conquer.
I really want to just drag back at the end of that. Just a button. All right. So that's executing on vision.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.